Good evening and thank you for joining us. We begin with a tragedy on the Sandy Lake First Nation where 3 children have died in a house fire. Sandy Lake is located about 600 kilometers north of Thunder Bay. The chief says the community is devastated and that the children range in age from about 5 to 9 years old. The mother and 3 other children escaped while the father was at work. Investigators, relief police officers, and 2 coroners are expected to fly into the community today. Anishinaabe Nation Deputy Grand Chief Bobby Narcisse is offering condolences to Sandy Lake and thanking first responders for braving the extreme cold at the fire scene. Well, the COVID outbreak at the Thunder Bay District Jail has grown considerably. OPSEU Local 737 President Bill Hayes says as of today there are 80 inmates and 34 staff members who have tested positive for the virus. He says fortunately most people are experiencing mild symptoms. Dealing with outbreaks at the jail and the shelter house is nothing new for the district health unit, but Dr. Janet DeMille says Omicron is making it more difficult to control. The familiarity of dealing with these outbreaks means they've had partnerships in place for nearly 2 years that lead to quick actions, but the crowded conditions at the jail make it very difficult to contain the spread of the virus, according to DeMille. Some of the people released from custody sometimes end up at the shelter house, which is also experiencing an outbreak. With that in mind, DeMille says the city is fortunate that vaccination rates among the homeless are high, leading to less severe cases.
We do have some of the highest immunization rates in among people who are experiencing homelessness by some of the indicators. And I think that that's really probably, is really working on our side right now and protecting those individuals, which I think is really important.
There are still 5 active COVID-19 cases at the shelter house and a total of 15 people are isolating. Executive Director Michelle Jordan confirmed today that more of them will soon be sent to the city's isolation shelter. The number of COVID patients at the Thunder Bay Regional Health Sciences Centre continues to rise, as do the number of COVID-positive ICU patients at the facility. COVID-19 cases at the regional have now risen to 27, up from 24 on Thursday, and there are 3 more COVID patients in the ICU, with now 8 total in intensive care. Overall hospital occupancy has fallen slightly to 96.5%, but the overall ICU occupancy has risen sharply from less than 73% on Thursday to nearly 91% just 24 hours later. The Thunder Bay District Health Unit is reporting 80 new COVID-19 cases, but the overall number of known active cases has dipped to 356. 4 of the new hospitalizations come from the Thunder Bay District, with 17 residents currently hospitalized with the virus. The Northwestern Health Unit is reporting 47 new infections, and the number of known active cases has fallen to 311. There are no new hospitalizations in that part of the region. 9 people there remain in hospital. And across Ontario, there are now a record-breaking 3,814 people in hospital with COVID-19, and there are 527 COVID patients in intensive care, up from 500 yesterday. Those who work in healthcare are sounding the alarm. They're calling on the government to do more to address a system in crisis. Colin DeMello reports.
Rod Phillips, Minister of Long-Term Care.
For the past 6 months, Rod Phillips has been the face of Ontario's long-term care sector, balancing the need to protect residents and overhauling a long-forgotten system.
Our government is taking the steps needed to fix long-term care.
But in a bombshell announcement, Phillips says he is stepping away from the role. He will not seek re-election in June and will step down as the MPP for Ajax next month.
Today's announcement represents a significant loss for this government.
Rod Phillips becomes Minister of Finance.
Despite being a first-time MPP, Phillips was given some of the most challenging roles in government. As Environment Minister, he was tasked with repealing the cap-and-trade system. As Finance Minister, he had to steer the economy through the pandemic. And recently, at Long-Term Care, he was responsible for implementing change to the sector.
I always found him to be the most reasonable person in the room. And I think that was always a balance that Minister Phillips will be remembered for.
Others see his legacy differently.
Most people close to Queen's Park would see Rod as one of the strongest ministers in the government. For the average person out there, he's the guy that went to St. Bart's when the government was asking everyone to stay home.
In December of 2020, Phillips was forced to resign as finance minister after taking a trip to the island of St. Bart's and only returning when ordered by Premier Doug Ford.
Obviously, I made a significant error in judgment.
Phillips is one of several progressive conservative MPPs who will not seek re-election this year. Pollsters say while Ford's party can be re-elected, there are some troubling signs.
Time for a change is increasing. So some people are looking at this and saying, we can do better than this government.
Phillips says he's returning to the private sector.
Okay, that was Colin DeMello on the resignation of long-term care minister Rod Phillips. That was announced this afternoon. Well, back in our city, the budget process continued last night with the public getting a chance to provide input on the proposed 2022 spending plan. A handful of deputations were heard by council and city staff. Vasilios Bellos has the story.
The public meeting was the second of 8 scheduled for the budget process, kicking off with a deputation from the Chamber of Commerce. President Charlotte Robinson highlighted some of the factors most important to businesses in the city and how they relate to the proposed budget. She says local businesses have unique needs, but there are some topics they're all concerned about.
Anything that can be done to reduce taxes, not only this year, but recognizing the longer term impacts of those taxes and that they do add on to each other year over year is really helpful to them right now, especially with so many being under closures and capacity restrictions.
The next presentation was provided by the Waterfront Trail Rotary Community Action Team, who are asking for more commitments from council to expand the Waterfront Trail. The group cited benefits including attracting newcomers to Thunder Bay and enhancing future tourism and economic development. Team leader Warren Phillips believes that the bill does not have to fall solely on the municipality.
The federal government announced in March of 2021 a $400 million trail fund for municipalities. The provincial government has an infrastructure stream with $320 million. We think it is reasonable to expect that the federal and provincial funding could match a serious multi-year trail funding commitment from the city.
Also discussed was cycling in Thunder Bay. Ken Shields with Just Bike T-Bay and Memorial Link provided the deputation, stressing accessibility for cyclists is not there in the city, forcing many to ride on sidewalks.
North-south cycling routes in Thunder Bay through our downtown areas have been identified as needed by consultants and advocates for decades.
Also discussed was the potential new police headquarters. However, that topic was ended quickly by City Manager Norm Gale. He stressed any further questions from council should be held until a future budget meeting, when the police service and the proposed $56 million project are officially up for discussion. Vasilios Bellos, TBT News.
Indigenous Affairs Minister Greg Rickford provided an update yesterday on the province's $10 million commitment to search for burial sites at former residential schools across Ontario. Rickford announced the funding at an event in Kenora back in June. Since then, he says his ministry has been working with the Indigenous-led groups to support some specific projects, most notably the Wajishkanigan First Nation near Kenora. There are also a couple of active applications being considered by those Indigenous groups. Rickford says the communities themselves have taken up the responsibility to organize specific activities as the situation is more complex than meets the eye.
Our responsibility is to make sure they have the tools to do them. And that's why, in addition to the resources that our government committed and I announced on 2 different places in the last calendar year, some of my other colleagues have come along with additional supports, which I think can help the Indigenous-led group focus on specific recovery and reclamation activities.
Rickford says as soon as they're able to identify other resources, more of the allocated budget can be used to search the 18 former sites. Thunder Bay Police have released the final number of impaired driving arrests made during the latest Festive Ride program. The ride checks began on November 26th and continued through the holiday season. City Police laid a total of 13 charges. 8 of them were for driving while impaired by alcohol. 3 were for drug impairments and 2 were for failing to provide a breath sample. Police also laid 8 charges against a 22-year-old man following a scary incident on December 30th. The impaired driver tried to evade a ride check and wound up dragging an officer from his vehicle for more than 250 meters. Meanwhile, the OPP's Festive Ride program saw 76 people charged with impaired driving across the Northwest region. The shipping season is coming to an end at the Port of Thunder Bay. The last ship will leave around midnight tonight when the Manitoulin carries a shipment of wheat to the lower lakes. While the total grain cargo was down this year, the port experienced growth in other areas, and officials are optimistic next season will be one for the record books. Alex Flood has the details.
As the Port of Thunder Bay loads its final grain shipment of the season onto the Manitoulin for tonight's departure, port officials are reflecting on the year that was. The tonnage of general cargo handled at Kiefer Terminal was the highest in 20 years, and potash shipments hit a 17-year high, exceeding 600,000 tons. Meanwhile, grain shipments were negatively impacted in 2021 after seeing an historic surge in 2020. The port spokesperson, Chris Heikkinen, says he was still impressed with the overall grain numbers following the drought in Western Canada.
The biggest challenge was the grain shipments, which were impacted by the weather conditions on the prairies. But considering what was happening on the prairies this season, 7.5 million tons of grain shipped is pretty good.
4 vessels across 4 facilities will remain docked in Thunder Bay for the winter. Some of the ships will undergo routine maintenance, while others need more significant repair work. With these upgrades and a probable return to more favorable crop conditions on the prairies, Heikkinen says 2022 should be a good year.
There's a lot of optimism around the shipments coming into Kiefer. We already have a lot of wind turbines coming in next summer, and we're looking at further growth in the phosphate fertilizer imports, which are for the Western Canadian farmers. And again, we see further growth in steel products as well at Kiefer. So it's looking positive for 2022.
Heikkinen adds the long-term trend with grain is an upward one, and although this year didn't go the way they had anticipated, he remains positive the grain volumes will make a comeback next year. Alex Flood, TBT News.
The Magnus Theatre Board of Directors has welcomed in a new general manager. Thunder Bay native Alexis Rowlandson says she's excited to help Magnus recover from the pandemic and thrive for years to come. Mitchell Ringos has the story.
The new general manager for Magnus is Alexis Rowlandson, an enthusiastic arts administrator who has experience working at some of Canada's most celebrated theatre companies, including the Stratford Festival, Shaw Festival in Niagara-on-the-Lake, and the Grand Theatre in London, Ontario. Rowlandson will work alongside artistic director Tom Curry. The Thunder Bay native spoke about how her experiences led her back to Magnus.
Well, the first performance I ever saw was Dracula here in 2005, and then many performances throughout the years, which definitely sparked my interest in theater. And then in my university career, I had the opportunity to see theater at different institutions across the province, and that definitely, that was it for me. I knew that was what I wanted to do.
Curry has been running the theater solo for some time now and says the dual leadership model will really help steer the boat through rough waves and allow them to enjoy the ride through smooth waters. He says hiring Rowlandson for the role was a no-brainer.
To have her join us here in Thunder Bay, to rejoin us in Thunder Bay, because as you know, Alexis is from Thunder Bay, to have her return to Thunder Bay and take the reins here at Magnus has been amazing. And I foresee a great partnership moving Magnus into its next 50 years.
With another year of the pandemic, the theater has had to add many COVID protocols to continue running shows and have now had to postpone the upcoming production of Salt Baby due to escalated restrictions. Magnus normally sees around 30,000 patrons annually, but that's been cut by close to half this season. However, Rowlandson says with support from all levels of government and locally, Magnus has been able to weather the storm.
They're one of the few theater companies in the country that's been able to regularly produce. They have some great health and safety measures in place, including the social distancing of our patrons and some outdoor performances. And they've made some really smart fiscal decisions over the last few years and throughout Magnus's history. So we're in a great position. We've managed to weather the storm and keep our team intact, and I'm hoping to continue with that.
As for when we can head back inside the theater to see a live show, Rowlandson says Magnus Theatre is waiting for further direction from the Ford government and will open back up once they are told it is safe to do so. Mitchell Ringos, TBT News.
Well, despite the challenges of the pandemic, I'm sure there are many good years to come for Magnus Theatre. Well, Fiona, today would have been a good time to be inside watching a play if we were able to do so, simply to get out of those chilly temperatures.
Yes, and chilly they were last night and into the early morning hours. Temperatures dropped down to -30 and wind chills were hovering around -38. Now, we didn't have much of a warm up under mostly cloudy skies, only topped out with a high of -19. The one positive note is that winds were very, very light. So the wind chill wasn't as extreme as it could have been, and as many were concerned it would be. Wind chills in the last few hours have been hovering around -24. Now, if we take a look at the extreme cold warnings yesterday, just to show that we are making progress, this entire portion of northwestern Ontario was red. So it is moving in an easterly direction. That means we're back to just cold as opposed to extreme cold, but it is still being felt in like Nipigon region, Greenstone, all the way north. So that means in those areas that are red, temperatures overnight could drop to as cold as -35. Wind chills are going to be in the -40 range. And of course, with temperatures like that, there's always a risk of frostbite. At this hour, Fort Frances is in a similar situation to Thunder Bay, -19. Fair amount of sunshine in the region, -17 in Kenora, -21 in Dryden. Red Lake, -20. Now, Red Lake was definitely a lot colder than Thunder Bay last night. So wind chills hit -41 overnight. Right now they're hovering around -25. Again, because of the light winds, the wind chills aren't as much of a factor at this hour. But as you can see, as you head further east, temperatures start to drop. -22 in Sioux Lookout, -24 in Armstrong, -24 in Greenstone as well. Last night, wind chills hit -44. But in Greenstone at this hour, because the winds are actually dead calm at this time, there is no wind chill to speak of. -23 in Marathon. Sault Ste. Marie also saw wind chills hit -38 last night. So tonight at this hour, they're enjoying -18. That's a definite improvement over last night. Now, it's going to be another cold one. -33 wind chills, -36, and some evening flurries. However, we are going to see a brief warm up over the weekend, but it's not going to start first thing in the morning. You're going to have to be patient. I'll have more details later on in the news hour.
Okay, a warm up. That's what I'm clinging to right now, Fiona. Thank you very much. Well, we've been hearing for some time about the surge in hospital cases due to the Omicron variant and burnout among healthcare staff across this country. Unfortunately, the latest modeling doesn't predict good news, particularly over the next few weeks. Well, the details as your Friday News Hour continues.
Activity far exceeds previous peaks. Even the downside of this curve could be considerable.